The conference room felt smaller by the second, and Lily Norris knew she had about 30 seconds before she made the biggest mistake of her career. She stood at the head of the mahogany table, her laptop already halfway into her bag, her presentation materials scattered across the polished surface like broken dreams. The four executives from Hartwell Industries stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to mild irritation, but none of that mattered anymore. This pitch had been dead on arrival. She could feel it in her bones. They had barely looked up from their phones during her entire presentation about sustainable restaurant supply chains. Her small family business, Norris Agricultural Cooperative, might have been revolutionary in its approach to connecting local farmers directly with restaurants, but these corporate suits clearly didn't care about innovation. They wanted numbers that made them richer, faster, and her ethical approach apparently wasn't sexy enough. "Miss Norris, we haven't even discussed terms yet," the man closest to her said, his voice flat and disinterested. "I appreciate your time, Mr. Henderson, but I think we both know this isn't going anywhere." Lily zipped her bag with more force than necessary. "You've checked your phone 14 times in the last 20 minutes. Your colleague over there has been scrolling through what I can only assume are stock prices, and the woman at the end actually dozed off during my sustainability metrics. So let's not waste any more of each other's time." She turned toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 years of work had gone into preparing for this meeting. 3 years of building relationships with farmers across 5 counties, of developing a logistics system that could compete with the big distributors, of proving that ethical business practices didn't have to mean financial suicide. And now she was walking away because she refused to sit there and be disrespected for 1 more minute. Her hand touched the door handle. "Wait." The voice came from behind her, deep and commanding, and it definitely didn't belong to any of the 4 men she'd been presenting to. Lily turned around slowly. A man stood in the doorway that connected to the adjacent conference room, a door she hadn't even realized was there. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that was just slightly too long to be conventionally corporate, and eyes that were such a deep brown they were almost black. He wore a suit that probably cost more than her car, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, perfectly tailored to shoulders that suggested he did more than sit behind a desk all day. But it was his expression that caught her attention. He looked intrigued. "Who are you?" Lily asked, aware that she sounded defensive. "Raphael Armstrong. I own Hartwell Industries." He walked into the room with the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. "And you're about to walk away from a deal that would change your life." "With all due respect, Mr. Armstrong, your executives made it pretty clear they're not interested in what I'm offering." Raphael glanced at the 4 men who suddenly looked significantly more alert. "Gentlemen, you're dismissed." They practically scrambled out of the room. Henderson actually knocked over his coffee cup in his haste to leave. When the door closed behind them, the silence felt heavy with possibility. "I was listening to your presentation from the other room," Raphael said, moving to the windows that overlooked downtown Portland. "Do you know why?" "Corporate espionage." The words came out before Lily could stop them, and she immediately regretted the sarcasm. But Raphael actually smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face from intimidating to almost approachable. "I like that you have a spine. Most people get nervous around me. I'm plenty nervous. I'm just also annoyed." "Fair enough." He turned to face her fully. "I was listening, because Henderson mentioned in passing last week that he had a meeting with some small agricultural cooperative that wanted to pitch us on changing our entire supply chain model." I wanted to hear what kind of person would have the audacity to approach $1 billion corporation and suggest we throw out our existing contracts. Lily's stomach dropped. $1 billion. We keep a low profile. Most people think Hartwell is just another regional restaurant supplier. We prefer it that way. He gestured to the chair she'd been sitting in earlier. Sit down. Give me the pitch again, but this time, pretend you're talking to someone who actually gives a damn. She should have been thrilled. This was exactly the opportunity she'd been hoping for. But something about Raphael Armstrong set her on edge, made her feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with business. Why should I trust that you're any different from them? She asked, not moving toward the chair. You shouldn't. But you should be smart enough to recognize that walking away right now means walking away from the only chance your company has of scaling beyond a handful of counties. His voice wasn't cruel, just honest. I looked into Norris Agricultural Cooperative before this meeting. You're operating on a shoestring budget. You've maxed out 2 business loans. Your largest client is a farm-to-table restaurant in Bend that accounts for 30% of your revenue. If they go under, you go under. Am I wrong? Every word hit like a physical blow because every word was true. Lily felt her face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. I did my research too, she said quietly. Hartwell Industries supplies over 300 restaurants across the Pacific Northwest. You prioritize cost efficiency over everything else, which means you contract with industrial farming operations that use practices I fundamentally oppose. Even if you liked my pitch, we would never agree on implementation. Try me. The challenge hung in the air between them. Lily looked at this man, this millionaire or apparently billionaire who had materialized out of nowhere to stop her from leaving, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. She sat down. For the next 45 minutes, Lily talked. She explained the cooperative model, how farmers got fair prices and restaurants got better products. She showed him the data on customer satisfaction and repeat business at the restaurants they supplied. She walked him through the logistics system she designed with her brother, how they'd solved the transportation challenges that made local sourcing impractical for most businesses. And unlike the executives before, Raphael listened. He asked questions, real questions that showed he understood not just business, but the actual mechanics of what she was proposing. The problem is scale, he said finally, leaning back in his chair. Everything you're describing works beautifully for 50 restaurants. It falls apart at 300. Not if you're willing to invest in the infrastructure. Do you have any idea how much infrastructure we're talking about? Approximately $47 million for the first 5 years, with the expectation of breaking even by year 3 and seeing significant returns by year 7. Raphael raised an eyebrow. You came prepared. I've been preparing for this meeting for 3 years. And you were going to walk away after 20 minutes. Like I said, I don't waste my time with people who aren't interested. He stood up, and Lily realized the meeting was over. Her heart sank despite the fact that this had gone infinitely better than the first attempt. I need to think about this, Raphael said. Can you come back tomorrow? Same time, but plan for at least 3 hours. I want my operations team to hear this pitch, and I want you to be ready to answer some very difficult questions about implementation. I'll be here. Good. He walked her to the door, and as she passed him, she caught the scent of his cologne, something subtle and expensive that made her suddenly hyper-aware of how close they were standing. And Lily, next time someone disrespects you in a business meeting, you don't have to accept it. But you also don't have to run. Sometimes the best move is to stand your ground and make them uncomfortable instead. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and left. That night, Lily sat in her small apartment above a bakery in southeast Portland, surrounded by printouts and spreadsheets, trying to prepare for every possible question Raphael's team might throw at her tomorrow. But her mind kept drifting back to those dark eyes, that slight smile, the way he'd listened to her like her words actually mattered. Her phone rang. It was her brother, Marcus. "How did it go?" he asked without preamble. "Complicated. I'm going back tomorrow." "That's good, right?" "I think so." "Marcus, did you know Hartwell is a billion-dollar company?" Silence on the other end. Then, "Are you serious?" "Apparently they keep a low profile." "Jesus, Lil. This is way bigger than we thought, I know. You can handle it, though. You're the smartest person I know." She smiled despite her nerves. "I'm the only person you know." "Not true. I know at least 6 other people." After they hung up, Lily tried to sleep but ended up staring at the ceiling instead, replaying the meeting in her mind. Something about Raphael Armstrong intrigued her beyond the business opportunity. There had been a moment, just before she left, when he'd looked at her with something that felt like respect and maybe something else, something she didn't want to name yet. She got to the Hartwell Industries building 20 minutes early the next day, wearing her other professional outfit, navy slacks and a cream blouse that her sister-in-law had insisted made her look competent and approachable. The receptionist, a friendly woman named Claire, recognized her from yesterday and told her to go straight up to the executive floor. Raphael was waiting by the elevator when the doors opened. "You're early," he said. "Punctuality is a virtue. So is confidence. Are you ready for this?" "Honestly, I'm terrified." He looked surprised by her honesty, then pleased. "Good. That means you care. Come on, they're waiting in the main conference room." The operations team turned out to be 7 people, all older than Lily by at least a decade, all looking at her with expressions of polite skepticism. Raphael sat at the head of the table, and Lily noticed he'd positioned the chair to his right for her, a subtle signal that she wasn't just a vendor pitching a service, but someone he considered worth listening to. The presentation went better than she'd hoped. The operations director, a sharp woman named Patricia, asked pointed questions about seasonal variations and supply disruptions. The logistics manager wanted to know about fuel costs and delivery schedules. The quality control specialist grilled her on food safety protocols and inspection procedures. Lily answered each question with the detailed preparation that had consumed the last 3 years of her life. 2 hours in, Patricia held up a hand. "Let me see if I understand correctly. You're proposing that we essentially rebuild our entire supply chain around small farms, many of which don't have the capacity to handle our volume, with a logistics network that doesn't currently exist at the scale we need, all while maintaining competitive pricing with our current suppliers." "Yes," Lily said simply. "That's insane. It's innovative." Raphael laughed, an actual laugh that made several people around the table look shocked. "She's got you there, Patricia." Patricia didn't look amused. "Boss, with all due respect, this is a massive risk for minimal guaranteed return." "What's the point of having money if we don't take risks?" Raphael stood up. "Thank you all for your time. I'll be making a decision by end of week." The team filed out, leaving Lily and Raphael alone again. She felt drained, exhausted from the intensity of the last 2 hours. "You did well," Raphael said. "Your operations director thinks I'm crazy. Patricia thinks everyone is crazy. It's why she's good at her job." He walked to the windows again, a habit she was beginning to recognize. "Do you want to get lunch?" The question caught her completely off guard. "Lunch?" "It's that meal between breakfast and dinner. I skipped breakfast, so I'm actually at risk of moving directly into early dinner territory, which would be tragic." "Is that appropriate? With a potential business partner? Probably not." But I'm hungry, and I'm curious about you, and those two facts seem more important than propriety right now. Lily knew she should say no. This was already complicated enough without adding personal dynamics into the mix. But she was hungry too, and more than that, she wanted to understand this man who had stopped her from walking away yesterday, who had listened when no one else would. "Okay," she said. They went to a small Vietnamese restaurant 3 blocks from the office, the kind of place with plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting, and the best pho Lily had ever tasted. Raphael clearly came here often based on how the owner greeted him, and Lily found herself reassessing her assumptions about billionaires who wore custom suits. "Tell me something that's not in your business plan," Raphael said after they'd ordered. "Like what?" "Like why you actually started this company. And don't give me the mission statement about sustainable agriculture and ethical farming practices. I want the real reason." Lily stirred her tea, considering how much to reveal. "My grandfather was a farmer. He had a small dairy operation outside Eugene. When I was a kid, I spent every summer there, helping with the cows, learning about the work. He used to say that farming was the most honest job in the world because you couldn't lie to plants or animals. They either grew or they didn't. They either thrived or they suffered. It all depended on how well you took care of them. What happened to the farm? He sold it when I was in college. Got priced out by industrial operations that could sell milk for half what it cost him to produce it. He died 2 years later. Heart attack, officially, but I think it was really a broken heart." She looked up at Raphael. "I started the cooperative because I didn't want other farmers to end up like him. I wanted to build a system where doing the right thing didn't automatically mean going out of business." Raphael was quiet for a long moment. "My father built Hartwell from nothing. He started with a single delivery truck and a contract to supply 3 restaurants in Seattle. By the time he died 5 years ago, we were operating across 6 states. He taught me that business is about efficiency, about maximizing profits and minimizing waste. But he also taught me that none of it matters if you lose yourself in the process. You miss him. Every day." He smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "He would have liked you. He respected people who weren't afraid to fight for what they believed in." Their food arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. Lily watched Raphael add alarming amounts of sriracha to his pho and found herself smiling. "What?" he asked, noticing her expression. "Nothing. I just didn't expect a billionaire to have a spice tolerance. I'm full of surprises." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing from business to family to the questionable decisions of the Portland Trail Blazers. Lily learned that Raphael had a younger sister who taught high school biology, that he ran marathons badly but enthusiastically, that he'd turned down opportunities to expand Hartwell nationally, because he believed in focusing on doing one thing well rather than many things adequately. When they finally left the restaurant, Lily felt like she'd known him for years instead of hours. "I'll call you Friday," Raphael said as they stood on the sidewalk. "With a decision." "Okay, Lily," he hesitated, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Regardless of how the business side works out, I'd like to see you again. For reasons that have nothing to do with agricultural supply chains." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. That might be complicated. Most good things are. She thought about that the entire drive home, about the way he'd looked at her when he said it, about the flutter of possibility that had taken root somewhere behind her ribs. Friday came with agonizing slowness. Lily threw herself into work, visiting farms and checking on deliveries, and trying desperately not to think about the phone call that would determine the future of everything she'd built. Marcus tried to distract her with terrible jokes and updates about his baby daughter. Her best friend Sarah suggested wine and a movie marathon. Nothing worked. When her phone finally rang at 3 in the afternoon, she almost dropped it. Lily Norris. "It's Raphael. Can you come to my office? Now, if possible." The drive downtown took 23 minutes, but it felt like hours. Claire at the front desk smiled and waved her through to the elevator. The doors opened directly into Raphael's office, which she hadn't seen before. It was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furniture that managed to be both expensive and comfortable-looking, and photographs on the walls that showed landscapes from around the Pacific Northwest. Raphael stood by the windows, because of course he did. "I have a proposal," he said without turning around. Lily's stomach twisted. "Okay. I want to invest $47 million into building the infrastructure for your supply chain model. Hartwell Industries will commit to transitioning 30% of our restaurant contracts to your cooperative over the next 2 years, with the goal of reaching 60% by year 5. We'll provide the capital, the operational support, and the market access. In exchange, Hartwell will become a 51% stakeholder in Norris Agricultural Cooperative. She'd expected negotiations, maybe a smaller pilot program to test the concept. She hadn't expected this. "You want majority control. I want to make sure this succeeds. And with all due respect to your abilities, you don't have the experience to manage a $47 million infrastructure project while simultaneously scaling operations to handle 300 restaurant clients." He finally turned to face her. "But I do, and my team does. We're not trying to take your company away from you, Lily. We're trying to help you build something that can actually achieve what you've been dreaming about. 51% is a lot. It is. But the alternative is that you walk away, continue operating on your shoestring budget, and probably go out of business within 2 years when your loans come due. Is that really preferable to sharing control of something that could change the entire regional food system?" He was right, and she hated that he was right. The logical part of her brain knew this was an incredible opportunity. But the emotional part, the part that had poured her soul into building this company from nothing, rebelled against the idea of giving up control. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "You have until Monday. That's only 3 days, I know. But Lily, if you're not sure about this by now, you never will be. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts and jump." That weekend was torture. Lily made lists of pros and cons, ran financial projections until her eyes crossed, and called every mentor and advisor she'd ever had. The advice was unanimous. Take the deal. It was too good to pass up, too transformative to refuse out of pride or fear. But Sunday night, sitting alone in her apartment, Lily realized her hesitation wasn't really about the business at all. It was about Raphael. She was attracted to him, undeniably and inconveniently attracted to him, and accepting his offer would mean working closely with him for years. It would mean navigating professional boundaries while dealing with whatever this thing was between them. It would mean complicating her life in ways she'd spent years trying to avoid. She thought about her grandfather, about the farm he'd lost, about the dream she'd been chasing for 3 years. And she thought about what he would say if he were here. He'd probably tell her to stop overthinking and start doing. Monday morning, she walked into Raphael's office at 8:30. "I have conditions," she said. He looked up from his computer, eyebrows raised. "I'm listening." "I want guaranteed seats on the board of directors for representatives from the farmer cooperative. I want veto power over any decisions that would compromise our ethical standards. And I want a clause that allows me to buy back majority control if I can raise the capital within 10 years. Done, done, and done. She blinked. Just like that, Lily, I'm not trying to screw you over. I'm trying to build something meaningful. Your conditions are reasonable. He stood up and extended his hand. Do we have a deal? She looked at his hand, at his face, at the future stretching out before her in ways she couldn't fully predict. Then she reached out and shook. We have a deal. His hand was warm and calloused in ways that surprised her. When he smiled, she felt the full weight of the decision she'd just made, for better or worse. The next 3 months were chaos. Lily had thought she was busy before, but that was nothing compared to the whirlwind of building an actual company infrastructure. There were meetings with architects about warehouse designs, negotiations with trucking companies about fleet contracts, endless conversations with farmers about expanding their operations. Raphael's team at Hartwell provided support, but they also expected results, and Lily found herself working 14-hour days just to keep up. Through it all, Raphael was there. Not hovering, not micromanaging, but present. He had a way of appearing exactly when she was most frustrated, asking the right questions to help her think through problems. He defended her decisions to skeptical board members and pushed back when she was being unrealistic about timelines. They developed a rhythm, a partnership that felt natural in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. They also developed a careful distance regarding anything personal. They were professional, friendly, respectful. They didn't have lunch alone anymore. They didn't talk about anything that wasn't business-related. It was sensible and mature, and it was driving Lily slowly insane. You're being weird, Sarah said over drinks one Thursday evening. You've been talking about warehouse loading docks for 20 minutes. Sorry. It's just been consuming my life. Or someone at the warehouse has been consuming your life. Sarah gave her a knowing look. When are you going to admit you have feelings for your business partner? I don't know what you're talking about. Right. And I don't know that you've checked your phone 6 times in the last 10 minutes, probably hoping he'll text. Lily put her phone face down on the table. It's complicated. It's only complicated if you make it complicated. Does he seem interested? Maybe. I don't know. We're building a company together. I can't risk screwing that up because I have an inconvenient crush. Life is short, Lil. Grandpa used to say that all the time, remember? Don't waste time on fear. That night, Lily lay awake thinking about all the moments with Raphael that had felt like more than business. The way he'd smiled at her across the conference table when she'd successfully negotiated a difficult contract. The time he'd brought her coffee at 11 p.m. when they were both working late, having remembered exactly how she took it. The afternoon last week, when she'd been upset about a farmer who was backing out of the cooperative, and Raphael had listened to her vent for an hour without once offering unsolicited advice. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe she was making this more complicated than it needed to be. The decision was taken out of her hands 3 weeks later. They were at a restaurant in Bend, one of the first Hartwell clients to fully transition to the cooperative supply chain. The owner, a passionate chef named Miguel, had invited them for a celebration dinner, and the food was extraordinary. Everything from the salad greens to the pork chops came from farms within 50 miles, and the difference in quality was undeniable. This is what we're building, Miguel said, raising his glass. This is the future of food. Thank you both for making it possible. After dinner, Raphael offered to drive Lily back to Portland. It was a 3-hour drive, and she should have said no, should have taken her own car or arranged other transportation. But she was tired and happy and maybe a little reckless from the wine, so she said yes. They talked for the first hour, processing the success of the evening, discussing next steps for expansion. Then Raphael turned on the radio, finding a station playing old country music, and they fell into comfortable silence. Halfway home, he pulled off at a rest stop. "Everything okay?" Lily asked. "I need to tell you something, and I need to do it when we're not surrounded by employees or business obligations." He turned to face her in the darkness of the car. "I like you, Lily. Not as a business partner, not as a colleague. I like you as a person, and I think about you constantly in ways that have nothing to do with agricultural supply chains, and it's been driving me crazy for months trying to maintain professional distance." Her heart was hammering so hard she was surprised he couldn't hear it. "Oh, if you don't feel the same way, that's fine. We'll go back to how things have been, and I'll never mention it again. But I had to tell you because Sarah was right. Life is too short, and I heard her say that to you at the restaurant last month when she thought I was in the bathroom, but I was actually coming back from talking to Miguel. You eavesdropped on my conversation, accidentally. But I'm not sorry because it gave me the courage to say this now." Lily started laughing, partly from relief and partly from the absurdity of this serious, commanding businessman admitting to accidental eavesdropping. "Raphael, I've had feelings for you since the day you stopped me from walking out of that conference room. I've been trying to ignore them because I was terrified of ruining our partnership. So we've both been idiots, apparently." He reached across the console and took her hand, his fingers threading through hers in a way that felt both new and inevitable. "Can I take you to dinner sometime? A real date, not a business meeting disguised as a meal. Yes. This Friday. Okay." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that Lily felt something in her chest crack open. When they got back on the road, they held hands the entire way to Portland, and Lily felt like she was 17 again, giddy and nervous and full of possibility. Their first official date was at a small Italian restaurant in the Pearl District. Raphael picked her up in his car, which turned out to be a sensible Volvo rather than the sports car she'd half expected, and opened her door like they were in a movie from the 1950s. They talked about everything except work. She learned that he was terrible at cooking but excellent at ordering takeout, that he'd once spent 6 months backpacking through Southeast Asia, that his greatest fear was becoming so focused on business that he forgot how to be human. "Is that why you invested in the cooperative?" Lily asked. "Because it felt human, partly, but mostly because you impressed the hell out of me." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You were so fierce that day, so unwilling to compromise your values even when it would have been easier. I've spent my whole life around people who make decisions based on profit margins and market share. You made decisions based on what was right, and it was refreshing. I almost walked away. But you didn't. You stayed and fought, and that's what mattered." They went for a walk after dinner, ending up at the waterfront despite the drizzling rain that was quintessentially Portland. Raphael took off his jacket and held it over both their heads like an ineffective umbrella, and they stood watching the lights reflect on the Willamette River. "I haven't done this in a long time," he said quietly, stood in the rain, dated, been interested in someone, let myself think about something other than work. He turned to look at her. "It's terrifying. Good terrifying or bad terrifying, the best kind." He leaned down and kissed her, soft and tentative, and Lily felt the rest of the world fade into insignificance. It was perfect in the way first kisses rarely are, gentle and searching and full of promise. They took things slow, both conscious of the professional complications and wanting to build something solid. They had dinner every Friday night, established it as their designated personal time completely separate from work. They went hiking in the gorge, watched indie movies at the Hollywood Theater, spent Sunday mornings at farmers' markets trying to guess which produce came from cooperative farms. At work, They maintained careful boundaries. No one knew they were dating, which felt both prudent and slightly ridiculous. Patricia definitely suspected something based on the knowing looks she gave them during meetings, but she kept her opinions to herself. 6 months into their relationship, Lily's brother finally met Raphael at a family barbecue. Marcus had been protective and skeptical right up until Raphael spent 45 minutes on the floor playing with Marcus's daughter Sophie, making her giggle with increasingly silly faces. "Okay, I approve," Marcus said to Lily while Raphael was distracted. "He's good with kids and he clearly worships you. Don't screw this up." "Thanks for the vote of confidence. I'm serious. You've been happier in the last 6 months than I've seen you in years. It's good. He's good. Don't overthink it." But overthinking was what Lily did best, and as the relationship deepened, she found herself wrestling with fears she couldn't quite articulate. Raphael was everything she could want in a partner: kind, supportive, funny, passionate about the things that mattered. But he was also a billionaire with resources and connections that made her small-town farming family feel impossibly distant. His world was board meetings and investment portfolios and charity galas. Hers was dirt under fingernails and early morning deliveries and farmers who paid in fresh eggs as often as actual money. The issue came to a head at a Hartwell Industries gala in November, a black tie fundraiser for a local food bank. Lily wore a dress she'd borrowed from Sarah, feeling awkward and out of place among people who wore formal wear like a second skin. Raphael looked devastating in a tuxedo, and she felt a surge of pride that he was there with her, his hand warm on her lower back as he introduced her to various business associates and philanthropists. But as the evening wore on, she felt increasingly like an outsider. These people spoke a language of wealth and influence she didn't understand. They made casual references to vacation homes and private jets and investment opportunities that represented more money than her entire family had seen in generations. "You okay?" Raphael asked during a brief moment alone. "Just tired. You've been quiet." "I don't have much to contribute to conversations about yacht clubs," he frowned, leading her away from the crowd to a quieter corner. "Talk to me. It's nothing. I'm just feeling out of my depth. With these people, Lily, most of them are boring as hell." "You're 10 times more interesting than anyone in this room." "That's not the point." She struggled to find the right words. "This is your world, Raphael. Fancy parties and expensive suits and people who measure success in millions. My world is farmers' markets and delivery trucks and trying to convince restaurants to pay an extra $1 per pound for ethically sourced beef. Sometimes I wonder if those worlds can actually coexist." He was quiet for a long moment. "Are you having second thoughts about us?" "No. Maybe. I don't know." She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "I love you, and that terrifies me because I don't know how to be in love with someone who lives in a completely different universe." "Lily." He cupped her face in his hands. "I don't care about any of this. The money, the parties, the black tie bullshit that comes with running a company like Hartwell. I care about building something meaningful and I care about you. Those are the only 2 things that matter. But this is part of your life. It's part of my job. It's not who I am." He pressed his forehead against hers. "You told me once that your grandfather said farming was the most honest job in the world. Do you know what I think? I think loving you is the most honest thing I've ever done. Everything else is just noise." She kissed him then, not caring that they were in public or that people might be watching. When they broke apart, she saw Patricia standing a few feet away, champagne glass in hand and a satisfied expression on her face. "I knew it," Patricia said. "You two have been terrible at hiding this." "How long have you known?" Raphael asked. "Since about 3 weeks after Lily accepted the partnership deal. You look at her like she hung the moon, boss. It's disgustingly sweet." She raised her glass in a mock toast. "Congratulations on finally making it official." After that night, they stopped hiding the relationship. It turned out most people had suspected anyway, and the ones who hadn't adjusted quickly. There were a few raised eyebrows from board members who worried about complications, but Raphael shut down that conversation quickly and firmly. The cooperative continued to grow. By the end of the first year, they'd expanded to include over 100 farms and were supplying nearly 40% of Hartwell's restaurant clients. The infrastructure they'd built was working better than anyone had predicted, and other regions were starting to reach out about replicating the model. Lily's life became a careful balance of managing explosive growth while nurturing a relationship that felt both solid and thrilling. She and Raphael developed rhythms that worked for them. Friday date nights, Sunday morning farmers' market runs, and a standing rule that they didn't discuss business after 8 p.m. unless it was an actual emergency. 2 years into their relationship, Raphael took Lily back to Bend, to the same restaurant where he'd first told her how he felt. Miguel welcomed them like old friends, and the meal was even better than she remembered. After dinner, Raphael suggested a walk. They ended up at a small park overlooking the Deschutes River, the water rushing past in the darkness, stars visible overhead in a way they never were in Portland. "You remember the rest stop?" Raphael asked, "where you admitted to eavesdropping on my conversation?" "Yes, I remember. I was so nervous that night. I kept rehearsing what I was going to say, trying to find the right words to explain how you made me feel. You did pretty well, as I recall." He took her hand, and she noticed his palm was slightly sweaty. Raphael never got nervous. "I'm nervous again." "Why?" Instead of answering, he got down on one knee. Lily's heart stopped, completely stopped, and then started again at about triple its normal pace. "Lily Norris, you walked into my life 3 years ago ready to walk back out because you refused to accept anything less than respect and honesty. You've challenged me, inspired me, and made me believe in possibilities I'd stopped imagining. You've built something extraordinary out of determination and integrity, and I am in awe of you every single day." He pulled out a ring box, opening it to reveal a simple diamond on a gold band. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Will you marry me?" "Yes." The word came out choked with tears and laughter. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood and kissed her with an intensity that made the rest of the world disappear. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, Lily looked at the ring and felt overwhelmed by the sheer improbability of her life. "I can't believe I almost walked away from that meeting," she said. "I would have chased you down. How could you possibly know that? Because walking away from you was never an option." He kissed her again, softer this time. "From the moment you zipped up that bag and headed for the door, I knew you were going to change my life. I just didn't know how much." They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at a farm outside Eugene, the same farm where Lily's grandfather had taught her about honest work and integrity. They exchanged vows under an oak tree, surrounded by family, friends, farmers from the cooperative, and half of Hartwell's executive team. Marcus walked Lily down the aisle while Sophie scattered flower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Raphael's sister gave a toast that made everyone cry and laugh in equal measure. Miguel catered the reception, every ingredient sourced from cooperative farms, and people danced until the stars came out. The cooperative continued to expand over the next several years, eventually operating across 4 states and supplying over 600 restaurants. Other regions developed similar models, and Lily found herself becoming an unexpected advocate for sustainable agriculture, speaking at conferences and advising policymakers. She never got entirely comfortable with the public attention, but Raphael was always there to remind her that she was fighting for something that mattered. 3 years after their wedding, Lily bought back majority control of Norris Agricultural Cooperative. She didn't have to. Raphael offered to simply transfer the shares as a gift. But it was important to her to do it properly, to prove that the company could stand on its own financial merits. When she signed the papers, Raphael opened champagne and toasted her success with genuine pride that had nothing to do with profit margins. They had their first child a year later, a daughter they named Grace, after Raphael's mother. Lily spent the first few months of motherhood in a sleep-deprived haze, trying to figure out how to balance running a company with keeping a tiny human alive. Raphael proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle in ways that made Lily fall in love with him all over again. Their son arrived 2 years later, and they named him Henry after Lily's grandfather. By then, they'd moved to a house with land outside Portland, enough space for a garden and chickens, and a life that felt grounded in the values that had brought them together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they drove back to the rest stop where Raphael had first told Lily he had feelings for her. It was a silly, sentimental gesture, but they'd made it a tradition. They sat in the car, holding hands, watching trucks pass on the highway. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped you that day?" Raphael asked. "Sometimes. I probably would have kept struggling along until the loans came due and I had to close the cooperative. I'd be working some corporate job I hated, still angry about the meeting where those executives ignored my presentation. I can't imagine that version of your life. Me neither. It feels like a different person." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for stopping me from walking away." "Thank you for staying." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the world pass by, thinking about all the improbable turns that had led them here. Lily thought about her grandfather, about what he would say if he could see what she'd built, the family she'd created, the life she was living. She liked to think he'd be proud. "We should get back," Raphael said eventually. "Your mom is probably letting the kids eat ice cream for dinner." "They'll survive. Grace is going to be absolutely wired on sugar. Small price to pay for date night." He laughed and started the car, and they drove home through the Oregon twilight, past farms and forests and the landscape that had shaped them both. Lily looked at her husband, at the ring on her finger, at the life they'd built together from a single moment of refusing to accept disrespect. She thought about walking away, about zipping up that bag and heading for the door, and she thought about staying, about taking the risk of trust and possibility. The best decisions, she'd learned, were often the ones that terrified you most. The ones that required letting go of control and accepting help, and believing that something extraordinary could come from unlikely partnerships. Years later, when people asked Lily about the success of the cooperative, she always told them the same thing. It started with being willing to walk away from anything that didn't serve her values, and it grew because she found someone who shared those values and was willing to build something meaningful together. But late at night, when it was just her and Raphael and the quiet of their home, she'd add the rest of the truth. It started with walking away, yes, but it became everything because one person refused to let her leave, because he saw something worth fighting for and had the courage to say so. Love and business, she discovered, weren't as separate as people thought. Both required trust, communication, shared vision, and the willingness to work through difficulties. Both demanded integrity and honesty, and both were infinitely better when you found the right partner. As their children grew, Lily and Raphael taught them about farming and business, about hard work and ethical choices, about building lives that reflected their values. They took them to visit cooperative farms, let them plant gardens and collect eggs and understand where food came from. They taught them that success wasn't measured in money alone, but in the positive impact you had on the world around you. The cooperative became a family legacy, something that would continue long after Lily and Raphael were gone. Marcus eventually joined the management team, bringing his logistics expertise. Sophie, when she was old enough, started a youth program teaching kids about sustainable agriculture. Grace showed early signs of inheriting her mother's fierce determination. Henry had his father's quiet thoughtfulness. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they threw a party at the farm where they'd gotten married. Hundreds of people came: farmers, restaurant owners, Hartwell employees, family, friends. Miguel flew in from Bend. Patricia gave another toast, this one about how she'd known they were perfect for each other from the beginning, and everyone should have listened to her. Lily stood with Raphael under that same oak tree, watching their children play with cousins and friends, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. She thought about the woman she'd been a decade ago, standing in a conference room ready to walk away from a deal that would change her life. She'd been right about that, at least. The deal had changed everything, just not in any way she could have predicted. "What are you thinking about?" Raphael asked, sliding an arm around her waist. "How grateful I am that you eavesdropped on my conversation with Sarah." "Accidentally eavesdropped." "Sure, accidentally." She leaned into him, comfortable in a way that came from years of trust and partnership. "And how grateful I am that you stopped me from walking out that door. Best business decision I ever made." "Is that all it was? A business decision?" He turned her to face him, both hands on her waist now, and looked at her with the same intensity he'd had that first day. "It was me refusing to let something extraordinary slip away. Everything else that mattered came from that choice." She kissed him as the sun set behind them, as their children laughed and their friends celebrated, and the farm hummed with life and possibility. This was the life she'd almost missed, the future she'd nearly walked away from because she was too hurt and too proud to see what was being offered. The deal that changed her life hadn't been the business partnership, though that mattered. It hadn't been the $47 million, or the expansion of the cooperative, or any of the measurable successes they'd achieved together. It had been the moment she chose to trust, to stay, to believe that something beautiful could come from taking a risk on connection. It had been Raphael seeing her, really seeing her, and deciding she was worth fighting for. It had been both of them choosing, every day, to build something meaningful together. That was the deal that changed everything. And it had started with a simple choice: stop walking away and start walking toward each other instead.